In Texas, size isn't just about acreage. It's about horsepower. It's about how big your iron looks parked at the co-op. It's about whether your tractor makes other men's equipment feel small. In the Panhandle, where cotton and wheat stretch to the horizon and neighbors measure success by what you drive, downsizing isn't strategy. It's surrender. It's admitting you couldn't keep up. And in March 2023, when Travis Holcomb traded his fleet of high-horsepower John Deere tractors for smaller Massey Ferguson units to save on fuel costs, every farmer in Hale County thought he'd lost his mind. They laughed at the coffee shop. They made jokes at the grain elevator. They said Travis was broke, desperate, or both. But by October, when the harvest heat turned brutal and half the county's big iron was sitting in dealer shops with blown transmissions and fried electronics, Travis's Massey Ferguson fleet was still running. And the men who'd laughed weren't laughing anymore. This is the story of a farmer who chose efficiency over ego, a decision that looked like failure until it became survival, and the harvest season that proved Texas pride costs more than diesel. Travis Holcomb ran 4,600 acres outside Plainview, Texas. Cotton and dryland wheat in rotation. His family had been on that land since 1961. His grandfather broke it with a farmall and a two-bottom plow. His father modernized it in the 80s with pivots and chemical applications. Travis took over in 2004 and scaled it up. More acres, bigger equipment, higher inputs. By 2019, he was running 5 tractors, all John Deere. A 9R.540 for primary tillage, 2 8R 370 units for planting and spraying, an 8R 310 for grain cart duty, and a 7R 290 for loader work and backup. Combined, those 5 machines represented 1,870 horsepower and $1.6 million in iron sitting in his equipment yard. Travis loved those tractors. They were powerful, intimidating. When he pulled the 9R 540 into town, people noticed. At 540 horsepower, it was the biggest tractor in Hale County. It made a statement, and in Texas, statements mattered. But by 2022, that statement was getting expensive. Diesel prices had climbed from $2.80 a gallon in 2020 to $4.90 a gallon by mid-2022. Travis's fuel costs had nearly doubled. In 2021, he'd spent $87,000 on diesel. In 2022, that number hit $164,000. Same acreage, same work, just more expensive to do it. Travis ran the numbers in January 2023. If diesel stayed above $4.50 a gallon, his cost per acre would climb to $196. That left almost no margin for error. One bad yield, one price drop, and he'd be underwater. He needed to cut operating costs. The biggest variable cost was fuel. And the biggest fuel consumer was his fleet of oversized tractors burning 14 to 18 gallons per hour doing work that didn't require that much horsepower. Travis started researching fuel-efficient alternatives. He wasn't looking to downsize. He was looking to optimize. But the data kept pointing him in the same direction. Smaller tractors with modern CVT transmissions and better torque management burned significantly less fuel, doing the same work as older, higher horsepower machines with less efficient drivetrains. A 250 horsepower Massey Ferguson 8S with a CVT could pull the same implement at the same speed as a 370 horsepower John Deere 8R with a power shift transmission, but it would burn 3.5 fewer gallons per hour doing it. Over a 1,000-hour season, that was 3,500 gallons saved. At $4.50 per gallon, that was $15,750 per tractor per year. Travis called a Massey Ferguson dealer in Lubbock, asked about fleet pricing on the 8S series. The dealer, a guy named Pete Sandoval, drove out to Plainview the next week. He walked Travis's equipment yard, looked at the 5 John Deere tractors and said, "You're burning a lot of fuel you don't need to burn." Travis said, "I know, that's why you're here." Pete said, "What if I could cut your fuel costs by 35% and increase your effective acreage coverage at the same time?" Travis said, "I'm listening." Pete's proposal was simple. Trade all 5 John Deere tractors for 4 Massey Ferguson units, 2 8S 265 models for primary work, 1 7S 2110 for planting and spraying, 1 6S 175 for grain cart and loader duty. Combined horsepower, 1,130. That was 740 horsepower less than Travis's current fleet. But the Massey Ferguson tractors had CVT transmissions, better fuel economy, and tighter turning radii. Pete said they'd cover the same ground faster with less fuel and fewer machines to maintain. Total package price, $1.44 million. Trade-in value on the 5 Deere tractors, $890,000. Net cost, $250,000. Annual fuel savings, $57,000. Payback period, 4.4 years. Travis sat with the numbers for 3 days. The math worked. But the optics didn't. Going from 5 tractors to 4 was downsizing. Going from 1,870 horsepower to 1,130 horsepower looked like retreat. And replacing the biggest tractor in the county with a Massey Ferguson that most people had never even heard of felt like admitting he couldn't afford to farm the way real Texas operators did. Travis talked to his wife, Jen. She looked at the fuel cost projections and said, "We can't keep bleeding money on diesel. If this saves us $57,000 a year, we do it." Travis said, "People are going to talk." Jen said, "Let them talk. They're not paying our bills." Travis called Pete on March 10th and said, "Draw up the contract." The deal closed March 15th. The 5 John Deere tractors were picked up on flatbeds and hauled to Lubbock. The 4 Massey Ferguson tractors were delivered March 17th. Red iron where green used to sit, smaller, quieter, different. Travis stood in his equipment yard staring at them, feeling like he'd just betrayed something he couldn't name. Word spread fast. By March 20th, half of Plainview knew Travis Holcomb had traded his John Deere fleet for Massey Ferguson's. The reaction was immediate and brutal. At the Cattleman's Cafe, where farmers gathered every morning for coffee, Travis walked in and heard the whispers. One guy, a cotton farmer named Dale Pritchard, said loud enough for Travis to hear, "I heard Holcomb downsized. Guess times are tough." Another guy laughed and said, "Massey Ferguson? What's next? A Kubota?" Travis didn't respond. He paid for his coffee and left. At the grain elevator, the manager, a man named Roy Stiller who'd known Travis for 15 years, asked him if the rumors were true. Travis said, "If you're asking if I traded my Deeres for Massey Ferguson's, yeah, it's true." Roy said, "Why'd you do that?" Travis said, "Fuel costs." Roy shook his head and said, "You're going to regret that. Those little red tractors aren't going to hold up out here. This is Texas. You need power." Travis said, "I've got plenty of power." Roy said, "Not the same power you had." The worst came from Travis's neighbor, a third-generation cotton farmer named Brock Ashford. Brock ran 5,200 acres and prided himself on having the most expensive equipment in the county. He ran all green, 3 9R series tractors, a Case IH combine, a fleet of grain carts and support equipment that looked like a small army. Brock drove past Travis's place one afternoon, saw the Massey Ferguson tractors parked in the yard, and stopped his truck. He walked over to where Travis was greasing a planter and said, "I heard you went red." Travis said, "I did." Brock said, "You broke?" Travis said, "No, just smart." Brock laughed and said, "If you were smart, you'd still be running real iron. Those Massey Fergusons are going to cost you when harvest hits and you can't keep up." Travis said, "We'll see." Brock said, "Yeah, we will." Travis started using the Massey Ferguson fleet in late March for pre-planting tillage. He hooked his 18-shank ripper to one of the 8S 265 tractors and took it to a 400-acre field. The ground was hard calichy clay, the kind that breaks lesser machines. Travis had run the 9R 540 through this same field the year before and averaged 4.8 miles per hour while burning 17.2 gallons of diesel per hour. He set the 8S 265 to auto mode and let the CVT find its range. The Massey Ferguson pulled the ripper through the calichy at 5.1 miles per hour while burning 11.8 gallons per hour, faster, and 5.4 gallons per hour cheaper. Travis finished the field in 2 days instead of 3, and he saved 194 gallons of diesel doing it. But nobody saw that. What they saw was a smaller tractor doing work that used to require the biggest machine in the county, and in their minds, that meant Travis was cutting corners. At the co-op, Dale Pritchard said, "I saw Holcomb running one of those little Massey Fergusons with a ripper. Looked like it was working pretty hard." Another farmer said, "He's going to burn that thing up trying to do 9R work with a 265. Nobody asked Travis how the tractor performed. They just assumed it was struggling because it was smaller. By May, Travis had planted 2,800 acres of cotton with the 7S.210 pulling his 16-row planter. Average speed 6.2 miles per hour, Fuel burn, 9.6 gallons per hour. The year before, he'd used the 8R 370 and averaged 5.7 miles per hour while burning 13.1 gallons per hour. The Massey Ferguson was faster and cheaper. But when Brock Ashford asked how planting was going, Travis just said, fine. He didn't share the numbers. He'd learned that people didn't want data. They wanted confirmation of what they already believed. And they believed Travis had made a mistake. Summer came early in 2023. By June, daytime temperatures in the Panhandle were hitting 105 degrees regularly. The cotton was growing, but the heat was relentless. Tractors that ran fine in moderate temperatures started showing stress. Electronics overheated. Transmissions ran hot. Cooling systems struggled to keep up. Travis's Massey Ferguson tractors, designed with larger radiators and better airflow management, handled the heat without issue. But across the county, bigger, older tractors were starting to break. Dale Pritchard's 9R 590 threw a transmission code in early July. The dealer said it needed a full rebuild. Parts were back-ordered. Estimated repair time, 6 weeks. Dale was furious. He had spraying to finish and harvest coming. He rented a replacement tractor for $2,400 a week and spent the next month cursing John Deere's parts availability. Brock Ashford's 9R 540 overheated in mid-July while pulling a grain cart. The cooling fan motor failed. The engine temperature spiked to 240 degrees before Brock could shut it down. The dealer said the motor was a 3-week lead time part. Brock had to pull the tractor out of service and use one of his older 8R units as a backup. The 8R didn't have the horsepower for the grain cart when it was fully loaded, so Brock had to make smaller runs, which slowed his harvest prep. He called Travis one night and said, "How are those Massey Fergusons holding up in this heat?" Travis said, "No problems." Brock said, "Lucky." Travis didn't say anything. Luck had nothing to do with it. By August, harvest was 2 weeks away. Cotton was ready. Wheat was already cut and in the bins. Travis's 4 Massey Ferguson tractors had run flawlessly through planting, spraying, and summer field work. No breakdowns, no overheating, no unexpected service. Total unscheduled downtime, 0 hours. He'd saved $31,000 in fuel costs compared to the same period the previous year. And his equipment maintenance budget was running $12,000 under projections because he had 1 fewer tractor to service. But the real test was coming. Harvest in the Texas Panhandle is brutal. Long days, high heat, dust, constant running. It's where weak equipment fails and strong equipment proves itself. Travis knew his Massey Ferguson fleet would either validate his decision or confirm everyone's worst assumptions. There was no middle ground. Harvest started August 28th. Travis ran his Case IH combine with the 8S 265 pulling the grain cart. Temperatures hit 108 degrees by mid-afternoon. The Massey Ferguson ran from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. without stopping except to dump loads. No overheating, no pressure loss, no electronic faults, just steady, reliable power in conditions that were breaking tractors all over the county. 3 days into harvest, Roy Stiller from the grain elevator called Travis and said, "I'm hearing you're the only guy in the county who hasn't had a breakdown yet." Travis said, "So far." Roy said, "What's your secret?" Travis said, "I don't know. Maybe downsizing wasn't as stupid as everyone thought." By September 5th, Brock Ashford had lost 2 tractors. The 9R 540 with the failed cooling fan was still down waiting on parts, and one of his 8R 370 units had thrown a hydraulic fault that killed the 3-point hitch. He was running harvest with borrowed equipment and a rental tractor that cost him $16,800 for the month. He drove past Travis's field one evening and saw the Massey Ferguson 8S 265 still running, still pulling, still working. Brock didn't stop, but he noticed. Dale Pritchard's 9R 590 came back from the dealer on September 10th. The transmission rebuild cost $47,000. 2 days later, it threw another code, same issue. The dealer said the reman transmission had a defect. They'd have to pull it again. Dale parked the tractor and finished harvest with his older equipment. He lost 6 days of optimal harvest window. That delay cost him test weight on 300 acres of wheat. He took a price hit of 14 cents per bushel. On 54,000 bushels, that was $7,560 in lost revenue, all because his biggest tractor couldn't handle the heat. By the time harvest ended on September 22nd, Travis had finished 4,600 acres with zero breakdowns, zero unscheduled service, and zero downtime. His total fuel cost for the harvest season, $38,400. The previous year, running the 5 John Deere tractors, he'd spent $71,200 for the same work. He saved $32,800 in 3 weeks, and his equipment was still running strong. The final numbers came in October. Travis's total operating cost for 2023 was $142 per acre. In 2022, it had been $189 per acre. He'd cut his costs by $47 per acre. On 4,600 acres, that was $260,200 in annual savings. The Massey Ferguson fleet hadn't just worked. It had redefined what efficiency looked like on his operation. But the bigger change was cultural. By late October, 3 farmers in Hale County had called Pete Sandoval asking about Massey Ferguson tractors. All of them had watched Travis's fleet run through harvest without breaking. All of them had lost time and money to their own oversized, overcomplicated machines. One of them was Roy Stiller's brother-in-law, a wheat farmer named Carl Metzger. Carl bought an 8S245 in November, traded a 9R490 that had spent more time in the shop than the field. He called Travis after his first week and said, "This thing uses half the fuel my Deere did." Travis said, "I tried to tell people." Brock Ashford never called, but in January 2024, he quietly listed his 9R540 for sale. The asking price was $387,000. It sat for 2 months with no offers. He dropped it to $340,000. A farmer from Oklahoma bought it in March. Brock replaced it with a Massey Ferguson 8S280. He didn't post about it, didn't tell anyone, just had it delivered on a weekday when most people were working. But word got out, and when Travis saw Brock at the co-op in April, Brock nodded and said, "You were right." Travis said, "About what?" Brock said, "Fuel costs. I can't afford to run big iron anymore." Travis said, "It's not about big, it's about smart." Brock said, "Took me a year to figure that out." By mid-2024, 5 farmers in Plainview were running Massey Ferguson tractors. All of them had switched from John Deere or Case IH. All of them cited fuel costs as the primary reason. And all of them had watched Travis Holcomb get mocked for downsizing, then watched him finish harvest while their big iron sat broken. Dale Pritchard never switched. He sold his 9R5590 after the second transmission failure and bought a used 8R410. Lower horsepower, but still green. He couldn't let go of the brand. But he stopped making jokes about Travis's tractors, because the joke had turned on him. Travis's fuel costs for 2024 came in at $89,000. That was $75,000 less than 2022. Over 2 years, he'd saved $140,000 in diesel alone. The Massey Ferguson fleet had paid for itself in fuel savings in less than 3 seasons, and his equipment reliability had gone from constant concern to non-issue. He hadn't called a service tech in 14 months. Not once. In Texas, where size and ego are woven into farming culture, Travis Holcomb became the cautionary tale that proved the opposite of what people expected. He'd downsized. He'd chosen efficiency over horsepower, and he'd survived a harvest that broke the men who'd laughed at him. That shift didn't happen because Travis lectured people or posted performance data on social media. It happened because people watched. They saw his tractors running while theirs sat. They saw his fuel costs drop while theirs climbed. And eventually, math beats pride. But Travis didn't gloat. He didn't rub it in. When farmers asked him about the Massey Ferguson fleet, he just told them the truth. It works, it saves money, and it doesn't break. That was all anyone needed to hear. Because in farming, those 3 things matter more than what color your tractor is or how many horses are under the hood. By 2025, the Massey Ferguson dealer in Lubbock had opened a satellite service center in Plainview. Demand had grown enough to justify it. Pete Sandoval hired 2 techs and stocked a full parts inventory. He called Travis one afternoon and said, "You know you're the reason this happened, right?" Travis said, "I just bought some tractors." Pete said, "You did more than that. You changed the market." The 4 Massey Ferguson tractors Travis bought in March 2023 are still running. The 8S.265 units have over 2,400 hours each. The 7S210 has 2,100 hours. The 6S175 has 1,800 hours. None of them have had a major failure. Oil changes, filters, and routine maintenance. That's it. Travis tracks every gallon of fuel, every hour of operation, every dollar spent. And every year, the numbers prove the same thing. Smaller, smarter iron beats big, thirsty machines when fuel costs matter and reliability counts. Brock Ashford runs his 8S.280 as his primary tractor now. He still has two older 8R units for backup, but the Massey Ferguson does most of the heavy work. He and Travis don't talk much, but they nod when they pass each other on the road. That's enough, because they both know what it costs to learn the same lesson. Pride is expensive. And in Texas, where everything's supposed to be bigger, sometimes the smartest move is to get smaller. Travis still farms 4,600 acres, still runs Massey Ferguson, still saves fuel, and every time someone new asks him why he downsized, he gives them the same answer. I didn't downsize. I right-sized. There's a difference. And there is. Downsizing is giving up. Right-sizing is optimizing. One is failure, the other is strategy. And the only people who can't tell the difference are the ones who've never had to choose between their ego and their operating budget. The men who laughed at Travis in March 2023 aren't laughing anymore. Some of them switched colors. Some of them didn't. But all of them respect the decision now. Because Harvest doesn't care about brand loyalty. It doesn't care about horsepower bragging rights. It only cares about one thing. Whether your iron is still running when the work needs to be done. Travis's was. Theirs wasn't. And that's the only scorecard that matters. That's the cost of ego in Texas. And it's a hell of a lot more than the price of diesel.